On December 29, 1890, the United States Army awarded 20 Medals of Honor for a single morning's work. 20. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration the country can bestow. It is given for acts of extraordinary heroism in the face of the enemy. And on that frozen morning in South Dakota, the United States government handed out more of those medals in a single engagement than in almost any other battle of the entire Indian Wars period combined. Here is the part that will make your jaw drop. There was no real battle. The men who received those medals had killed somewhere between 250 and 300 Lakota Sioux men, women, and children. The majority of the dead were unarmed. Many were shot in the back while running away. And the United States government called it a victory worth celebrating with its highest honor. Does that sound like heroism to you? Because it certainly did not sound like heroism to the survivors who crawled out of the snow 3 days later. This is the story of the Wounded Knee Massacre. And before you think you already know what happened, let me stop you right there. You do not. Not really. The history books give you a sentence, maybe two. They told you it was a tragic misunderstanding. They told you tensions were high, that a gun went off accidentally, that chaos followed. That framing is not just incomplete, it is misleading in ways that matter enormously. Because what happened at Wounded Knee on that December morning was not an accident that spiraled out of control. It was the final, brutal chapter of a decades-long campaign to destroy a people, their culture, their land, and their very identity. By the time this video is over, you are going to see those 20 medals in a completely different light, and you are going to understand exactly why Wounded Knee did not end the story of the Lakota people. It only transformed it. To understand what happened on that creek bed in South Dakota, you have to go back further than 1890. You have to go back to the promises. Because the entire tragedy of Wounded Knee is built on a foundation of promises made and promises broken, one after another, each betrayal worse than the last. In 1868, the United States government signed the Treaty of Fort Laramie with the Lakota Sioux. This was a formal, legally binding agreement. The government promised the Lakota an enormous swathe of territory that included the Black Hills of South Dakota, a place the Lakota called Paha Sapa, the heart of everything that is. The treaty was clear. The Black Hills belonged to the Lakota people forever. No white settler could enter without Lakota permission. The army guaranteed it. The president signed it. And the Lakota believed it, because why would you not believe a treaty signed by the most powerful government on the continent? 6 years. That is all it took. In 1874, Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills. Officially, it was a military reconnaissance mission. Unofficially, everyone knew what Custer was looking for. And he found it. Gold. Just like that, the treaty was worthless. Thousands of prospectors flooded into Lakota territory. The government did not stop them. The government did not even try to stop them. Instead, Washington sent negotiators to the Lakota with a new offer. Sell us the Black Hills. The Lakota refused. The Black Hills were sacred ground. They were not for sale at any price. So the government tried a different approach. They told the Lakota that all bands must return to their reservations by January 31st, 1876, or be considered hostile. It was the dead of winter. Moving entire villages across hundreds of miles of frozen plains in the middle of winter was nearly impossible. Many bands simply could not comply, even if they wanted to. The government declared them hostile anyway and sent the army. What followed was the Great Sioux War of 1876, and for one brief, shining moment, it looked like the Lakota might actually win. In June of that year, had the Little Bighorn River in Montana, a coalition of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors annihilated Custer and his entire command. 268 soldiers dead in a single afternoon. It was the greatest Native American military victory in the history of the Plains Wars, and it shocked the entire country. Newspapers across America screamed for revenge. Congress immediately passed legislation that essentially voided the Fort Laramie Treaty and seized the Black Hills outright. The Lakota had won the battle and lost everything else. The army poured into the plains in overwhelming numbers. By the following year, most of the great war leaders were either dead, imprisoned, or had surrendered and returned to the reservations. Crazy Horse was killed while in army custody in 1877 under circumstances that remain deeply suspicious. Sitting Bull fled to Canada with a band of followers. The resistance was broken, or so the government thought. Life on the reservations in the 1880s was designed to be a slow suffocation. That is not a dramatic metaphor. That is a precise description of federal Indian policy during that era. The government's official goal, stated openly and without embarrassment by policymakers of the time, was to destroy Native American culture. Kill the Indian, save the man. That phrase was coined by Richard Henry Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, and it became the guiding philosophy of an entire generation of American Indian policy. Children were torn from their families and sent to boarding schools hundreds of miles away, where they were forbidden to speak their languages, wear their traditional clothing, practice their ceremonies, or use their native names. They were given European names, European clothes, and European Christianity. The schools were not gentle places. Abuse was common. Children died, and the parents left behind on the reservations were powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, the reservations themselves were being systematically dismantled. In 1889, Congress passed the Dawes Act, which broke up the communally held reservation lands into individual allotments. Each family received a plot of land, and the rest, millions upon millions of acres that the Lakota had been guaranteed by treaty, was declared surplus and opened to white settlement. In a single legislative stroke, the Great Sioux Reservation lost approximately 9 million acres. 9 million. The Lakota went from a people who had roamed freely across the northern plains to a people confined to shrinking plots of land that could barely support subsistence farming. And subsistence farming in the semi-arid climate of South Dakota was brutal work, even for experienced farmers, which the Lakota were not. Congress then cut the food rations that the government was legally obligated to provide under treaty terms. People went hungry. The winter of 1889 to 1890 was brutal. Crops had failed across the reservations. Disease was spreading. Children were dying of malnutrition. The Lakota were desperate. Into this desperation walked a vision. In 1888, far away in Nevada, a Paiute holy man named Wovoka had a revelation. During a solar eclipse, he claimed to have died and traveled to the spirit world, where he met the Christian God and the spirits of all the native people who had gone before. God gave him a message and a dance. If native people lived righteously, if they danced the ghost dance, the earth would be renewed, the dead ancestors would return, the buffalo would come back, and the white men would be swept away or simply disappear. It was a message of hope for people who had almost no hope left. The ghost dance spread across the plains like wildfire. Among the Lakota, it took on a particular intensity. Some followers began wearing special ghost dance shirts painted with spiritual symbols, which they believed would make them bulletproof. Think about that for a moment. People so desperate, so crushed, so out of options that they genuinely believed a painted shirt could stop an army rifle. That is the depth of the despair we are talking about. The ghost dance terrified white settlers and government officials. And honestly, you can understand why, even if their reaction was wildly disproportionate. Thousands of native people gathering, dancing for hours and sometimes days, falling into trances, singing songs about the world being renewed and the white men gone. To nervous settlers on the edge of the frontier, it looked like the beginning of an uprising. Indian agents on the reservations sent panicked telegrams to Washington. The army was mobilized. General Nelson Miles, commanding the division of the Missouri, began moving troops into position around the Lakota reservations. And the government made a fateful decision. They decided to arrest Sitting Bull, the great Hunkpapa Lakota leader who had returned from Canada in 1881 and was now living on the Standing Rock Reservation. Sitting Bull had not personally led the ghost dance movement, but he had not tried to stop it either, and his presence gave it legitimacy. On December 15, 1890, Indian police arrived at Sitting Bull's cabin before dawn to arrest him. What happened next set the entire catastrophe in motion. Sitting Bull came out of his cabin peacefully, his followers gathered, voices were raised, and then a shot was fired. Within seconds, the scene exploded into chaos. When it was over, Sitting Bull was dead, shot by the Indian police officers who had come to arrest him. He was 59 years old. His death sent shockwaves through the reservation. A band of Hunkpapa followers fled south in panic toward the Cheyenne River Reservation, hoping to find shelter with the Miniconjou Lakota, led by a chief named Bigfoot. Bigfoot himself was already on the Army's list of potential troublemakers. But here is something the history books rarely tell you about Bigfoot. He was not a ghost dance militant. He was, by all accounts, a pragmatist and a peacemaker. He had spent years trying to maintain workable relations between his people and the government. When he heard that General Miles wanted to see him, his first instinct was to comply. He was sick, already suffering from pneumonia, coughing blood as his band began moving through the frozen Badlands. He was heading toward the Pine Ridge Agency to surrender. He was flying a white flag. The Army intercepted Bigfoot's band on December 28th. Colonel James W. Forsyth of the 7th Cavalry, Custer's old regiment, surrounded the camp near a creek called Wounded Knee. About 350 Lakota people were in that camp. Roughly 230 of them were women and children. Forsyth had 4 Hotchkiss mountain guns, basically small artillery pieces, capable of firing almost 50 explosive shells per minute, positioned on the surrounding hills, aimed directly down into the camp. In the morning, Forsyth ordered his men to disarm the Lakota. Soldiers moved through the camp, searching teepees and going through belongings. The atmosphere was extremely tense. Many of the young Lakota men were angry and frightened. One of them, a deaf man named Black Coyote, held his rifle above his head and insisted he had paid good money for it and would not give it up without compensation. 2 soldiers grabbed him and tried to wrestle the gun away. The rifle discharged, a single shot, and then the world ended. Soldiers opened fire from all sides. The Hotchkiss guns on the hills began firing explosive shells into the camp at an almost incomprehensible rate. People ran in every direction. Men, women, and children were cut down indiscriminately. Some tried to surrender. They were shot anyway. A group of women and children fled into a dry ravine and were hunted down and killed. Bodies were found 2 miles from the camp. People had been running and were shot from behind. A survivor named Dewey Beard, who was wounded multiple times but managed to live, later described the scene in testimony that is almost unbearable to read. He described holding his wife as she died. He described watching children fall. The shooting lasted perhaps an hour. When it was over, at least 250 Lakota were dead, and many estimates put the number closer to 300. 25 soldiers also died, most of them killed by friendly fire in the chaos. The Army buried the Lakota dead in a mass grave. Bigfoot's frozen body, twisted into a contorted position by the rigor mortis that had set in while he lay in the snow, was photographed. That photograph still exists. You can look at it today. Here is the pivot that changes everything about how you understand Wounded Knee. The massacre did not end the story of the Lakota people. It did not break them. It did not accomplish what it was supposed to accomplish, which was to crush any remaining spirit of resistance and make the Lakota quietly accept their situation. Instead, it created a wound that never healed. A wound that became a symbol, a rallying point, a source of identity and defiance that would echo through the decades and explode with extraordinary force 83 years later. In 1973, armed members of the American Indian movement occupied the town of Wounded Knee for 71 days. It was a direct confrontation with the United States government, a statement that the issues of 1890 had never actually been resolved. The FBI surrounded them. There were gunfights. 2 Native American men were killed, and the world was watching. The occupation of Wounded Knee in 1973 put the Lakota and the question of Native American rights on the front pages of newspapers around the globe. The name of that creek in South Dakota became synonymous not with defeat, but with resistance. And those 20 medals of honor, they have never sat right with anyone who looks closely at the historical record. For decades, Native American groups and historians and veterans organizations have called on the United States government to rescind them. Rescind means to officially take back, to invalidate, to acknowledge that they should never have been given. The argument is straightforward. You cannot award your nation's highest honor for heroism to men who shot women and children in a mass killing. It poisons the meaning of the medal itself. Congress has faced petitions. Resolutions have been introduced. The debate is ongoing. And here is what makes it so important. It is not just about the past. Rescinding those medals would be an official government acknowledgement that what happened at Wounded Knee was not a battle, not a conflict, not a tragic misunderstanding. It was a massacre. It was wrong, and the people who did it do not deserve to be honored for it. That acknowledgement matters, not just symbolically. It matters because the United States still has not fully reckoned with what was done to the native peoples of this continent, and Wounded Knee is the sharpest, clearest, most undeniable example of the gap between what this country says it stands for and what it has sometimes done. So here we are, 136 years after that frozen December morning. The Black Hills are still not returned to the Lakota, even though a Supreme Court ruling in 1980 established that they were taken illegally and awarded the Lakota over $100 million in compensation, a sum that has now grown to over $1 billion with interest. The Lakota have refused to accept the money. They do not want money. They want their sacred land back. That billion-dollar fund sits unclaimed to this day, the largest unclaimed court settlement in American history, because the Lakota refused to trade their claim to Paha Sapa for cash. That is not the act of a defeated people. That is the act of a people who remember. The ghost dance is gone, but the spirit behind it, the desperate, furious, beautiful insistence that we are still here, we have not disappeared, we will not be erased. That spirit is very much alive. Bigfoot died flying a white flag, trying to surrender, trying to find a peaceful way through an impossible situation. The army killed him anyway. What does that tell you about the nature of the conflict? What does it tell you about whose history gets written and whose gets buried in a mass grave and forgotten? 250 to 300 people, mostly women and children, killed by the Army of the United States of America on December 29, 1890, awarded with 20 medals of honor, buried in a mass grave. And for most of the 20th century, ought taking to American school children as a regrettable footnote, a misunderstanding, the unfortunate end of the Indian Wars. But it was not a misunderstanding. It was a massacre, and calling it what it is, saying that word clearly and without qualification, is the first step toward actually understanding what it meant and what it still means. Because history is not just the past. History is the story a nation tells about itself. And the story America has told about Wounded Knee for over a century has been a story shaped by the people who won, not the people who were killed. The survivors of Wounded Knee and their descendants have been telling a different story all along. Maybe it is time to listen to them. So let me ask you something, and I want you to think about it seriously before you scroll away. If the United States government officially rescinded those 20 medals of honor, what would that mean? Would it be justice? Would it be enough? Or is it just a symbolic gesture that leaves the deeper questions untouched? Because the Black Hills are still not back. The Lakota Pine Ridge Reservation still has one of the highest poverty rates in the entire country. The life expectancy on Pine Ridge is lower than in many developing nations. Unemployment runs at rates that would be considered a national emergency if they occurred anywhere else in America. The wounds of Wounded Knee are not metaphorical. They are material. They are present. They are measurable. And they are a direct result of the history we have been talking about in this video. So what do you think? Was Wounded Knee simply a tragedy of its time, a product of an era that we have moved beyond? Or is it unfinished business, something that the United States has not yet truly faced? Drop your answer in the comments below, because I genuinely want to know what you think. And I have a feeling this one is going to start some serious conversation. If this video made you think, if it showed you something about American history that you did not see before, then you are exactly the kind of viewer that Cradle of Democracy is made for. We dig into the stories that the textbooks skip over, the moments that were inconvenient, complicated, or just too honest for the sanitized version of history that most people grew up with. Hit subscribe right now so you do not miss what is coming next. And if you want to keep going down this particular rabbit hole, check out our video on the Trail of Tears, which tells the equally devastating story of what happened to the Cherokee Nation a generation before Wounded Knee. The pattern you will see across these videos is not a coincidence. It is a policy, and understanding that policy is how you understand the real history of this country. See you in the next one.